In the summer of 1973, a 22-year-old woman named Della walked into the Hawkins County clerk's office, her footsteps making little sound on the worn linoleum. The air inside was thick with the smell of old paper, stale coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of chewing tobacco. 3 men were in the room. The clerk, Mr. Thompson, a man whose face seemed permanently fixed in an expression of mild disappointment, and 2 older farmers in faded overalls, their hands stained with the earth they worked. They stopped their low conversation and turned to look at her, their eyes holding a mixture of curiosity and reflexive dismissal. She was young and she was alone, and in that place, at that time, that combination often meant you were lost or you were trouble. Let me tell you about Della. She was not like the other girls in the county. While they were learning to set a table for a dozen, she was learning to read the rings of a tree. While they were practicing their smiles for the sons of prosperous farmers, she was practicing the patience of a heron, standing motionless by a creek bank, watching the subtle dance of water over stone. She was quiet, but it was not the quiet of shyness. It was the quiet of observation. Her eyes, a pale gray like a cloudy dawn, did not flit about but settled on things, studying them, understanding them from the ground up. She had been raised by her grandfather on a small plot of land up near the Virginia line, and he had taught her a different kind of scripture. Not the one of pages and ink, but the one written in erosion patterns, in the lean of a tree toward the sun, in the way a creek slows and deepens before a bend. Now, let me explain why she was there. She had come to ask about a piece of land, a ghost on the county tax rolls. 116 acres that nobody wanted. The men in that office knew it well. They spoke of it the way you might speak of a cursed thing. It was bottomland, down in a hollow, and for the last decade, it had been the exclusive property of 2 relentless forces of nature. The first was the beaver. A family, then a colony, had moved into the creek that ran through it. With an industry that shamed the most diligent farmer, they had built a series of dams, one after another, turning the slow, meandering Beaver Creek into a staircase of stagnant, marshy ponds. The land was flooded, the old pasture drowned, the trees at the water's edge dead and skeletal. It was a swamp. The second force was wisteria, an invasive, monstrous vine that had escaped from some long-forgotten homestead garden. It had found the damp, disturbed soil of the beaver swamp to be paradise. It grew with a terrifying vigor, climbing the dead trees, strangling the living ones, and forming a dense, tangled canopy over the entire flooded area. Its lavender blossoms, beautiful for a week in spring, were a funeral wreath for the land beneath. It blocked the sun, choked out all native growth, and created a gloomy, humid world underneath. The county had tried to sell it 3 times. No one bid. It was seen as having 2 catastrophic and expensive problems. You'd have to dynamite the dams and drain the swamp, a massive feat of engineering. Then you'd have to wage a chemical war on the wisteria, a battle that could take years and cost a fortune with no guarantee of success. So, it sat. A 116-acre testament to nature's ability to reclaim its own. Della stood before Mr. Thompson's desk, her hands resting calmly on the worn leather of her satchel. "I'm here about parcel 734, she said, her voice clear and steady. "The old Jennings place." Mr. Thompson looked up over his spectacles. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "The beaver swamp?" he asked, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. One of the farmers behind her let out a short, dry chuckle. "That's the one," Della confirmed. "Honey, what in the world would a little thing like you want with that mess?" the clerk asked. It wasn't a cruel question, not exactly. It was the question of a man who saw the world in columns of profit and loss, of assets and liabilities. And that land was the definition of a liability. There's no farming it. There's no logging it. You can't even walk through most of it without sinking to your knees in mud. I'm not looking to farm it or log it, Della said. I'm looking to buy it. The three men exchanged a look. It was a complicated expression, a blend of pity and amusement. They saw a girl with more imagination than sense, a daydreamer about to trade her hard-earned money for a patch of mud and mosquitoes. The men gathered in that dusty office had been trading land and machinery since before she was a thought, and they believed they knew exactly what they were seeing. He was right. From their perspective, from any conventional perspective, it was an act of profound foolishness. "There's no mortgage on it," Mr. Thompson said, leaning back in his chair, adopting the tone of a patient uncle explaining a difficult truth. "County owns it outright for back taxes. We've been trying to get it off the books for 6 years. We'd just about pay someone to take it." He named a price. It was laughably low, a price per acre that wouldn't buy a decent pair of boots. It was the price of a burden. "I'll take it," Della said, without a moment's hesitation. The silence that followed was heavier than the humid summer air outside. The farmer who had chuckled now coughed to cover his surprise. Mr. Thompson just stared. He had expected her to balk, to reconsider, to come to her senses. Her immediate acceptance was more baffling than her initial inquiry. He pushed a stack of papers across the desk. "You sign these. You bring a cashier's check tomorrow. And it's your problem." She did not sign them right away. She picked up the top sheet, the plat map, and studied it. Her finger traced the line of the creek, tapped on the areas marked flooded. The men saw a young woman staring at a map of a disaster. They couldn't see what she was seeing. They couldn't see the engine. Then, in 1958, when Della was just 7 years old, her grandfather had taken her to that same creek, long before the beavers had transformed it. He was a man carved from the Appalachian hills themselves, weathered and quiet, with eyes that saw the world in layers. He didn't own much, but he was beholden to no one. He lived by a simple code: pay cash. Owe nothing. Understand the land not as your servant, but as your partner. He carried a small, leather-bound journal, and in it, he didn't write about money or yields. He wrote about water. "Look here, Dell," he'd said, pointing to a spot where the water eddied behind a large rock. "Water is always looking for the easy way down, but it's the hard things, the rocks and the logs, that give it character. That's where the life is." He taught her that the coolest water in a creek wasn't in the fastest riffle, but in the deep, shaded pools. He showed her how fallen leaves weren't waste, but the beginning of a food chain, feeding the tiny insects that in turn fed the fish. He didn't teach her lessons. He revealed systems. He gave her a lens, a way of seeing the intricate machinery of the natural world. "Most folks see a problem," he'd often say, "and they want to tear it down and build something new. They spend all their money fighting. A wise person finds the engine inside the problem and just steers it." He passed away when Della was 19, leaving her not a farm or a fortune, but something far more valuable. He left her that lens. He left her his journals, filled with decades of meticulous observations on water temperature, insect hatches, and the slow, powerful cycles of the land. And he left her a small sum of money, saved over a lifetime of frugal living tucked away in a coffee can. It was just enough for a foolish girl to buy a swamp. Let me stop and ask you something. Have you ever wagered everything you had on an idea that no one else could even see? Not just a risk, but a leap of faith into a reality that only you understood. That was Della Crane, standing in that county office, holding a map of a place everyone else had abandoned. Now, let me explain the secret. Let me tell you what Della saw when she looked at that plat map, and what she had seen when she'd spent a week secretly scouting the property, wading through the mud and pushing through the wisteria. The men in the office saw two problems. Della saw two solutions that had, by a miracle of natural engineering, canceled each other out to create something near perfect. Commercial trout farms, the successful ones, spend fortunes building concrete channels called raceways. These long, narrow ponds allow them to separate fish by age and size, to manage feeding, and to control water flow. As Della looked at the map, and as she had stood on a high bank looking down at the land itself, she saw that the beavers, in their relentless construction, hadn't built a single swamp. They had built a series of 5 distinct, interconnected ponds, each one slightly lower than the last. They had, for free, built a perfect, earthen set of raceways. Water flowed from the top pond to the bottom, naturally aerating as it spilled over each successive dam. And the wisteria, that monstrous, choking vine. Everyone saw a plague that had to be eradicated. But Della saw a roof, a dense, living, impenetrable canopy that arched over the beaver ponds. Trout are sensitive fish. They need cold, clear water. In the Tennessee summer, the sun can heat a shallow pond to a temperature that will kill them. But under the vast green tent of the wisteria, the sun never reached the water. The shade was absolute. The ponds remained cool, deep, and dark, even in the blistering heat of August. The vine that strangled the trees was the very thing that would shelter the fish. One final piece: the beavers themselves. Their constant activity, the gnawing of wood, the dragging of branches, the stirring of the muddy bottom, this wasn't just destruction. It was cultivation. This activity created a constant churn of nutrients and debris, fostering an explosion of the very aquatic insects and crustaceans that trout feast upon. The beavers were not just the architects. They were the chief farmers, seeding the water with a rich, free, and endless supply of food. 2 disasters: a flooded valley and an invasive vine. Together, they had accidentally created the perfect, self-sustaining, gravity-fed, shaded, and self-feeding environment for raising rainbow trout. The engine was already built. All she had to do was steer it. The next day, she returned with a cashier's check. Mr. Thompson took it, a look of genuine pity on his face. "Good luck to you, miss," he said, and it sounded like a condolence. She took the deed, folded it neatly, and placed it in her satchel next to her grandfather's journal. She walked out of the courthouse and into the oppressive summer heat, the sole owner of 116 acres of what the entire county considered worthless mud. She was not a fool. She was a visionary who had just purchased a machine, disguised as a swamp. The subsequent 5 years were a masterclass in patience. The world saw a young woman disappear into a place it had already forgotten. Her nearest neighbor was a man named Silas Blevins, a farmer of the old school who believed in straight furrows, clean fence lines, and the brute force of a diesel engine. His property bordered the high ridge overlooking Della's swamp. From his back porch, he could see the dense canopy of wisteria, a solid, unmoving sea of green. He and the other farmers would talk about her at the co-op. "That Crane girl? Still down there playing in the mud. Heard she's trying to farm fish in that sewer." They laughed. It was the easy laughter of men who are certain in their knowledge. Della's work was quiet and methodical. She did not arrive with bulldozers and dynamite. She arrived with a shovel, a handsaw, and a profound respect for the system already in place. She spent the first year just walking the land, learning its rhythms. She reinforced the main beaver dam at the top of the system with carefully placed stones, ensuring a steady, reliable flow. She didn't clear the wisteria, she managed it, cutting narrow paths for access, like hallways in a great green cathedral. She found the old spring that fed the creek, the one her grandfather had marked in his journal, and she cleared its mouth, increasing the flow of cold, clean water into the top pond. She worked alone, from sunup to sundown. The land tested her. There were days she would sink to her waist in thick, cold mud. Mosquitoes swarmed her in dense clouds. A water moccasin fell from a low-hanging branch, missing her by inches. She was often soaked, muddy, and exhausted, but the land also rewarded her. She saw otters playing on the dams. She watched wood ducks raise their young in the sheltered water. She felt the deep, resonant peace of a place that was utterly her own. Then came the moment of private doubt. It was in her 3rd year, after a week of torrential spring rains. The pressure on the main dam was immense. One evening, as dusk settled, a section of it gave way. It wasn't a catastrophic failure, but a significant breach. The water level in the top pond dropped by 2 feet overnight, leaving a muddy, stinking ring around its edge. The careful balance she had been nurturing was broken. She stood there in the gray morning light, the sound of the rushing water a roar of failure in her ears. Everything felt impossible. The scale of the work, the sneering certainty of the men at the co-op, the sheer, dumb force of the water, it all pressed down on her. She sat on a fallen log, her face in her hands, and for the first time, she truly considered giving up. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was just a swamp. Maybe she was just a foolish girl with a dead man's dreams. She could sell it for logging rights, maybe make a few $100s, and walk away. The thought was a bitter relief. Then, she reached into her satchel and pulled out her grandfather's journal. The leather was warped from the damp, the pages soft as cloth. She opened it to a random page. His familiar, steady handwriting met her eyes. The 12th of October, 1961, it read. The creek is a liar today. It runs high and angry from the rain, looks strong, but its strength is temporary. The stones on the bottom have not moved. The deep pools are still deep. The real character of water is not in the flood, but in the drought. It is defined by its patience. He was right. The flood was a tantrum. The system itself, the deep-rooted logic of the place, was still there. The stones had not moved. She stood up, the doubt washing away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. It took her 2 weeks of back-breaking labor, using nothing but a shovel, a wheelbarrow, and the principles of leverage her grandfather had taught her to repair the dam. She made it stronger than before, weaving saplings into the structure and packing it with clay from a bank downstream. When she was done, the pond began to slowly, patiently refill. She had not been defeated. She had been tested, and she had passed. That fall, she bought her first fingerlings. 10,000 rainbow trout, barely an inch long, delivered in oxygenated tanks by a hatchery truck that could barely make it down her overgrown lane. The driver looked around at the tangled wilderness and shook his head. "You sure about this, miss? This water looks wild." "It's perfect," she said. She released them into the top pond, a silver cloud of new life disappearing into the dark, cool water. For the next 2 years, her work was a quiet ritual of care. She monitored the water flow, managed the spillways between the ponds, and watched. She watched the fish grow, their bodies sleek and strong. They feasted on the endless supply of insects. They thrived in the cold, shaded water. She would occasionally net one, checking its health, its weight. They were perfect. The flesh was firm, the color vibrant. They tasted clean, like cold water and wild earth. It was a quiet satisfaction, a small, early success known only to her. Word travels in strange ways. It doesn't always move from neighbor to neighbor. Sometimes it leaps over the hills and lands in the city. By 1980, Della had been harvesting her trout for a few years, selling them in small batches to a fish market in a nearby town. But the quality was exceptional. A chef from a high-end restaurant in Knoxville was visiting his family, ate some of her trout, and was stunned. He had never tasted farm trout like it. It lacked the muddy, flat taste of fish raised in concrete ponds on grain feed. This tasted wild. One crisp autumn afternoon, a polished blue sedan, its tires caked in mud, pulled up as far as it could go down her lane. A man in a clean, pressed suit got out, looking profoundly out of place. He was the chef. He had come to see for himself. Della met him by the first pond. She wasn't what he expected. He saw a woman in her late 20s, her hands calloused, her clothes practical, but with a look of calm authority in her eyes. "They told me you were farming trout back here," he said, his voice full of city skepticism. Della just nodded and cast a small net into the pond. She pulled out a 2-pound rainbow trout, shimmering and muscular. It fought with the vigor of a wild thing. The chef's eyes widened. He knelt and looked into the water, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. "But how?" he asked, gesturing at the gloom under the wisteria. "Where are your pumps? Your filters? Your aeration systems?" "The beavers built the pumps," Della said simply. "The wisteria is the roof, and the water takes care of itself." He didn't understand, not really, but he understood the fish. He understood quality. Before he left, he placed a standing order for 50 pounds a week at a price that made Della's breath catch in her throat. Soon, other chefs heard about it. The Crane Creek trout became a thing of legend in the culinary circles of East Tennessee. Refrigerated trucks began making the treacherous journey down her lane, a sight that did not go unnoticed by her neighbors. Mr. Silas Blevins had watched it all from his ridge. He'd seen the girl disappear into the swamp. He'd shaken his head at her solitary, pointless labor. Now he saw the expensive cars and the commercial trucks. His own farm was struggling. The price of diesel was up, the price of feed was up, and a dry spell had withered a portion of his corn. He saw prosperity flowing out of the one place everyone had agreed was worthless, while his own sensible, traditional farm bled money. The certainty he had felt for years had curdled into a mystified envy. One day, he couldn't stand it anymore. He put on his boots, walked down his hill, and crossed the old stone wall that marked the edge of his property. He pushed through the brush until he found one of Della's narrow paths. He followed it to the edge of the third pond. Della was there, mending a screen on one of the spillways. She looked up as he approached, not startled, just watchful. He stood there for a long moment, a big man made small by his own confusion. He took off his hat and ran his hand through his thinning hair. The air was cool and damp, and the only sound was the gentle gurgle of water and the buzz of insects. "How?" he finally asked, his voice raspy. It was not a demand. It was a plea. "How did you do it, Miss Crane?" Everyone. We just saw a bog, a mess of vines and beaver trouble. My whole life, my father's whole life, we'd have looked at this and seen a decade of work just to get it back to zero. And you're pulling money out of it hand over fist." Della finished twisting a piece of wire and stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans. She looked at him, and her gray eyes held no triumph, no "I told you so." They held only a quiet, factual clarity. "You saw a swamp, Mr. Blevins," she said, her voice soft. "My granddaddy taught me to look for an engine. The beavers built the channels. The vines built the roof. The water provides the power, and the whole thing makes food for the fish. I didn't build a farm. I just learned how to steer the one that was already here." He stared at the dark water, then at the thick canopy overhead, then back at her. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a foolish girl, but at a master of a craft he couldn't begin to comprehend. The simple, elegant logic of it was both maddening and beautiful. He had spent his life fighting the land, bending it to his will with steel and sweat. She had simply listened to it and joined the partnership. He shook his head slowly, a slow, wondering motion. "I'll be," he whispered. He looked her square in the eye. "Miss Crane, I owe you an apology. We all do." We laughed. "And you were right all along." He held out a calloused, earth-stained hand. "You were right." She took it. His grip was firm, the grip of a man who had just had his entire world reordered. The narrative now jumps forward, across the decades. The 1980s gave way to the 90s, and the new millennium arrived. Della Crane never left her 116 acres. Crane's Folly became the Crane Creek Trout Farm, a name synonymous with quality and a kind of quiet genius. She never expanded beyond what the land could naturally support. She never took on debt. She paid her taxes on time every year to a county that was now immensely proud to have her. The parcel that was once a liability on their books became an anchor, a local landmark. Developers came, sniffing around, imagining luxury cabins nestled by the ponds. They offered her sums of money that would have staggered the men in the clerk's office all those years ago. She politely and firmly turned them all down. The land was not for sale. It was not an asset to be liquidated. It was a partner. Today, if you were to go there, you would find Della, a woman now in her early 70s. Her hair is the color of silver winter light, but her eyes are the same. They are the eyes of a person who has spent a lifetime in observation, who understands the deep, slow grammar of the wild. She is a respected elder, a quiet matriarch of the valley. The farm is still prosperous, a model of sustainable aquaculture that experts from universities come to study. They arrive with their sophisticated equipment and their complex theories, and she listens patiently. Then, she takes them to the spillway between the third and fourth ponds and shows them how a few carefully placed rocks can change the oxygen level in the water below. She shows them things her grandfather taught her, things not found in their textbooks. And you might see her with her granddaughter, a girl of 10 with Della's same quiet eyes. She is not teaching the girl to mend nets or repair dams. Not yet. She is teaching her to see. They sit on a log, the same one where Della once sat in doubt, and they watch a kingfisher dive for a minnow. "See how he waits?" Della says. "He's not guessing. He's watching the light on the water. He knows the fish is there before he even moves." She hands the girl a small, worn leather journal, a blank one. "Write down what you see," she says. "Not what you think. What you see." The tangible legacy, the lens, was being passed on. The man in the county office saw a flooded piece of land and an invasive vine. They saw two problems requiring two expensive, warring solutions. Della Crane looked at the very same place and saw a single, elegant system. They saw a swamp that needed to be drained and a weed that needed to be poisoned. She saw a nursery that needed a roof. They wanted to impose their will upon the land, to conquer it. She chose to understand it, to become its partner. The land, in turn, remembered that choice. It did not make her rich in the way a stock market might. It made her wealthy in a way that is deeper and quieter and lasts forever. It gave her a life of purpose, free from debt and full of a profound and enduring peace.